Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays. Happy Friday, everybody. My name is Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Today's guest presenter is Radojka Boriski, Director, Training and Consulting at Safe Food Alliance. So it's not your first time with Radojka. How are you doing? Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm doing well. Good morning, everyone.
And it's our tradition. Tell us where you're presenting from today. Whereabouts are you in the world?
So I'm out of a small town called Visalia, California, and it's in the middle of the state of California. So I'm 3.5 hours north of Los Angeles and 3.5 hours south of San Francisco.
Very nice. And it's probably sunny, yeah?
Yes, it's still sunny. It's going to start getting cold around the 1st of November. Typically after Halloween. That's when we start getting cold. No snow, though.
No, well, thankfully. Well, it's a bit, as usual in the UK, it's very placid. It's just overcast and cool. Nice autumn day. Anyway, tell us where you're joining from, everybody. Karin from Germany, Kek from Malaysia, Leila from Uganda, Judy from the Philippines, Belle from Minnesota, Louisa from Florida, Heather from Ireland, and Sharon from Arizona, and one more, Majid from Dubai. Wherever you're from in the world, you're all very welcome. And we've got over 1,300 people registered. Great topic. So I'm going to play the sponsors' ads now. Kindly sponsor Food Safety Fridays, and we'll be back for the presentation shortly. Slightly too quick, but thanks to the sponsors, and I'll hand you over to Radojka, and I'll be back for the Q&A later.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Please type in the chat that you can hear me. I want to be sure that everybody can hear me.
It's loud and clear for me. It just takes a few seconds for the comments to come through, but
okay, thank you.
If there's any problems, oh, here we go. There you go. Loud and clear.
All righty. Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll start with our presentation today. So today we're going to be talking about climate change and food safety. So let's discuss briefly what we mean by climate change. So climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns, primarily caused by human activities such as burning fossil fuels. So there are many things that can cause climate change nowadays, and we're going to be looking at the different activities that might release greenhouse gases, which trapped heat in the atmosphere, causing global temperatures to rise. As a result, we're seeing more extreme weather events like droughts, floods, and heat waves, which we'll discuss again in the next few slides. So what happens when we actually have the climate being impacted by all these changes? So we see a rise in temperature with a global average temperature that is increasing, which leads to a hotter summer and milder winters. As a matter of fact, I was in Washington these past few days, and I was surprised that at this time of the year was kind of warm, actually. The temperature was between 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And interestingly enough, I went and, did some sightseeing right after the conference. And when I got in my Uber to go back to my hotel, the Uber driver made the comment that is unusually hot, that they typically were at this time of the year under 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So that can tell you that, yes, weather patterns are changing. Some years we just see a normal change. Some other years we're going to be seeing still warming climate when it's not usual. Another thing or key impacts in climate change is sea level rise. As ice caps and glaciers melt, sea levels rise, threatening coastal communities with flooding, extreme weather events as well. So these extreme weather events are more frequent, and severe weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, heat waves, and heavy rainfall disrupts ecosystems and human society. So what happens with climate change and how it affects the global food systems? So climate change isn't just affecting the weather in itself. It is actually disrupting global food systems. We have impact in agriculture, livestock, fisheries, and food distribution. So as temperature rise and weather becomes more unpredictable, agriculture, livestock, fisheries, and food distribution networks are all impacted. In some areas, crops are failing, while others are experiencing reduced yields. These disruptions ultimately affect food availability, costs, and safety, posing new challenges for farmers and food safety professionals alike. One of the things that we have seen here in California, we have been in a perpetuated drought for quite a while, and in some cases we might get early rains, which actually where we are situated at the moment, or I'm situated at the moment, there is a lot of nut industries. So when you have early rains, it affects how the fruit forms and how the blooms happen. And so you might see lower yields after early rains. Or if you, on the other side, if you don't have rain, obviously it affects agriculture. If you don't know, the state of California actually supplies a lot of food, not only here in the States, but actually in the global distribution as well. So before we move on, I want to bring to your attention what we mean exactly by food safety. I know some of you probably are already in the food safety world, but just as a reminder, we are talking about, or we refer to the handling, preparing, and storing food in ways that prevent foodborne illness. As climate change affects the environment in which we grow, transport, and store the food, the risk of food safety increase. We'll explore these risks actually today. So again, let's see how we look at climate change and food safety altogether. So how exactly are climate changes and food safety connected? So in short, changes in temperature, humidity, and precipitation can create the perfect conditions for foodborne pathogens, pests, and contaminants to thrive. Additionally, extreme weather events can change infrastructure, leading to food spoilage or contamination during storage and transport. So we're going to break this down in more detail in the next few slides. So let's talk about the temperatures being above or rising temperatures. So warmer climates accelerate the growth of foodborne pathogens like Salmonella, pathogenic E. coli, Listeria monocytogenes. So these bacteria really thrive in hotter conditions, meaning that as the global temperature rises, the risk of contamination in perishable foods like meat, dairy, and fresh produce also increases. Studies have shown that with each degree increase in temperature, the rates of foodborne illnesses rise, posing serious public health risks. So if you are in the food industry, you understand that we have a temperature that we call the danger zone. And these temperatures, anything between 41 degrees and 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And so as the temperatures rise, we are giving the opportunity to these microorganisms to thrive in the environment. And we start losing a little bit of control from the environment standpoint in the soil and other items. The other thing that we need to take into account is that if you have soil spore formers, they're going to thrive in this heat as well, because they're just going to sporulate because it's adverse to them. And in that form, they can actually perpetuate in the environment over time. So we have to be really conscious on how we handle these rising temperatures in terms of agriculture and how we handle these materials when they come into our facilities. The other challenge is the rainfall patterns. I already talked about drought and early rains here in California, and I'm not sure how you're experiencing where you live, but we are definitely seeing a pattern on the rainfall. So droughts are becoming more frequent, causing water shortage for agriculture. And without sufficient clean water for irrigation, crops are more susceptible to contamination from unsafe sources, including untreated wastewater. On the other hand, excessive rainfall and flooding can wash contaminants, including pathogens, into water supplies used for irrigation and increasing the risk of foodborne illnesses. I also can tell you that if you work in the industry and you are sourcing your water from well water, these flooding might affect or likely to affect the water bed, which means that also the well water will get affected, and you might see or are likely to see more patterns of contamination in these waters, especially microbial. And you can also see some chemical depending on where you're situated. If you're situated like we have several facilities here where I live, it's a highly agriculture area, you're going to see also other risks as well. So the next thing is your extreme weather events. So again, we talked about hurricane, floods, and storms that can directly affect food safety. Floodwaters, for example, can carry, again, harmful bacteria, and extreme conditions can also damage food storage and transportation infrastructure, which also can lead, depending on what you're transporting, it will lead to contamination, spoilage, and increased food safety risks, especially in perishable items. The next thing is the oceans warm up. So as oceans warm up, they're having a significant impact on food safety. So ocean temperatures rise, toxic global algae blooms, and also known as red tides, are becoming more common. These blooms produce toxins that accumulate in fish and shellfish, which can be dangerous to humans when consumed. And additional higher ocean temperatures can increase the presence of harmful pathogens like Vibrio in seafood, posing new challenges for food safety in the fishing industry. So I lived in Venezuela for quite a while, and one of the things that, or neighboring countries that we have that depends a lot on fishery and fishery products because they're really right up the coast. It's well, one is Colombia, but the other one is also Peru. Depends on fishing, and I remember clearly growing up, and we had El Nino, and I don't know if you are familiar with El Nino, but El Nino, it's a pattern of like, it's like a wave, a heat wave that goes through the south of southern hemisphere and can warm the water. And I remember having a actual seeing in the news not to eat any fish that was coming from Peru because they had a Vibrio outbreak. And so they were warning people not to eat any imported fish from that country. And again, nothing against Peru. It's just an experience that we had. So as we warm the oceans, we can see patterns for these bacteria that are actually thriving in salty waters to start increasing. So pesticide residues in crops. So climate change is also increasing the need for pesticides to fight the spread of pests and disease that are thriving in warming conditions. So unfortunately, these might lead to higher pesticide residues in crops, even though we have actually regulations or measurements. Here in the US is EPA. So I'm pretty sure you have relatable organizations in your sites. We still going to have to monitor these very closely. So when not properly managed, these residues can end up in our food supply, as we know, posing chemical risk to consumers. So it is essential to closely monitor pesticides used to maintain food safety in a changing climate. The next thing I'm going to talk about is mycotoxins in food. So we know that these mycotoxins are from mold, and as the temperatures increase and the weather patterns change, increased prevalence of mycotoxins, which are toxic compounds produced by certain types of fungi, will get more prevalent. So warmer and more humid climates provide ideal conditions for the growth of these fungi on crops like corn, wheat, and peanuts. And mycotoxins can cause severe health issues. We know that there have been studies that it causes long-term disease, especially in the liver. And some of those consequences have been actually manifested as cancer. So food storage as well gets affected by the weather patterns as it is becoming more challenging when temperatures rise and humidity levels fluctuate. You have to remember that when you have refrigerated systems, even though they are handled by a system that it's driven by ammonia and sometimes in some other cases glycol, if you have room temperatures outside that are higher than normal, you might experience condensation and you might experience other kinds of issues during storage that might lead to the presence of bacteria or other contaminants in the environment. So also improper storage conditions can lead to the growth of, again, harmful bacteria and mold, and might it even more difficult to ensure food safety through the supply chain. Also, as we experience different weather patterns, pest population changes. So climate change is also affecting these pest populations, and as temperature rise, pests that were once limited to certain regions are expanding their range, posing new threats to crops and livestock. And these pests can contaminate food at multiple stages of the supply chain, from farms to warehouse, increasing the risk of foodborne illnesses and reducing the overall quality of the food supply. So let's talk now about water quality. So how many of you use water at your sites, either as an ingredient or as a sanitation? I'll wait for those comments to come by, but in the meantime, what type of water do you use? Do you use city water, which typically has some sort of treatment in order to make it potable, or do you use well water? Okay, so again, this is going to change the way you handle your water quality. There is a huge difference in terms of food safety and quality and how we handle them in our operations. So I see some comments already coming through. Some of you use spring water. Some of you use city water and deep well, both in some cases. So again, if you have a water quality program, you know that they are handled differently. And droughts reduce the availability of clean water for irrigation, while flooding and heavy rainfall can contaminate water supplies, as we mentioned earlier, with harmful chemicals, bacteria, and pathogens. Poor water quality affects crops, livestock, and seafood, increasing the likelihood of contamination for the food supply as well. So let's talk next about the vulnerability of supply chains. So global food supply chains are particularly vulnerable to disruptions caused by extreme weather events. Of course, if you have a heavy winter, right, and your trucks cannot get to your facilities, then that's going to disrupt your production. That's going to disrupt the supply chain. Storms, floods, and droughts can delay food transport and spoil perishable goods, and additionally, damage to infrastructure like roads, ports, and storage facilities can increase the risk of contamination during transport, leading to significant food safety concerns as well. So we also have globalization concerns, because food production and distributions is globalized, and it has been globalized for a long time, and that's a good thing, right? Because I, for example, migrated from Venezuela, so I like to get food from there. I want to find it here because I miss food from home. That's still going to pose a risk for me getting my preferred food if the actual transport gets affected by weather patterns. So extreme weather events in one country might affect food imports in another, and climate-related issues in developing nations can lead to food safety concerns for exported products. So this makes international collaboration, a food safety standard, even more important as we face challenges. And I already saw in one of the comments, somebody mentioned ISO 22000, and actually the changes that happened recently in ISO, which led to the changes in FSSC 22000 GFSI scheme, and I'll expand to that later if there is questions about that. But again, making international collaboration on food safety and food safety standards even more important, because we're facing these challenges not just in a particular region, but in all countries around the world. The other challenge that we have in here is antimicrobial resistance. So this is being exacerbated by the climate change. And so warmer temperatures and altered ecosystems are contributing to the spread of resistant bacteria in food-producing animals. And this makes it more difficult to treat foodborne illnesses and increase the risk of outbreaks that are harder to control. So again, we need to take into account that these might increase microbial resistance to antibiotics as we treat more and more animals that might get affected by this climate change. So we need to be very careful. The next thing is chemical contaminants. So industrial pollution is aggravated by climate change, and it's another threat to food safety. Chemicals released into the air, soil, and water can find their way into crops and livestock. So exposure to these contaminants can lead to long-term health issues for consumers, making it essential to monitor and regulate chemical pollution and food production. So we have talked, part of the industrialization is your recycling. And we have seen nowadays that even though we have had the good intention for recycling, these recycling facilities may not get all the recycling materials. And we're seeing now that soil is absorbing these chemicals and it's affecting the food supply chain one way or another. The next thing I want to talk is about migration patterns. So climate change is also driving migration. It's not just the situation in the country in itself anymore. People are looking for better places to live. I can tell you again, I'm from California. I should not complain. But where I live, the climate is very harsh. We get temperatures in here, and it's not just because of climate change. It has been as is for a long time, but it has been exacerbated a little bit for the drought. I live in a valley, and the temperatures can get in here in a good summer day to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's close to 42, 43 degrees centigrade, which is really hot. And I am just, after 23 years, still don't get used to it. And not to mention that when we have fires, which in California, they're seasonal. They happen every summer in different parts of the state. We get the wind blows from the coast or from the west area into the east. And in some cases, when these fires are very exacerbated, which has happened on and off in different years, we can get ash rain. So that is affecting the health here in particular, not just the food in itself, but the health of people because of the pollutants in the air. So if we get some migration patterns, again, in my case, I'm looking to move out of the state, not just for economic reasons, but also I would like to have better weather and more water. These migration can affect actually agricultural practices in the regions that people move to, because it might increase the pressure of food systems and leading to challenges in maintaining the food safety standard. Every country and every region have a way of doing agriculture. So again, these might get affected by that. So we also see a decrease in food nutritional value. So again, if depending on where we are actually doing agriculture, we might have an indirect impact of climate change in the reduction of nutritional quality of food. So the increased CO2 levels can decrease the protein and iron and zinc content in staple crops like wheat and rice. And this not only affects nutrition, but also food safety, as these nutritional deficiencies can weaken immune systems and increase susceptibility to foodborne illnesses as well. Another thing is the impact on fresh produce safety. So fresh produce is especially vulnerable to climate changes. So warmer temperatures increase pests, as we mentioned earlier, and water contamination can increase the risk of bacterial contamination in fruits and vegetables. So since these foods are often consumed raw, the risk of foodborne illness is particularly high, and proper handling and monitoring are essential to ensure food safety. And we mentioned earlier the impact that this has on fish and shellfish safety. So these foods can be susceptible specifically to parasites. And this is particularly concerning in regions that they rely heavily on seafood as a primary food source. And also, if you are a avid fan like I am, and my household is of sushi, we have to be very careful where we go and eat, and we might have vulnerability now in terms of food safety if the food is not handled properly and we don't take into account how these the seafood can get affected by climate change. So if people are not sourcing for the right, and they're not actually from the right places, and they're not actually providing safe food, then we might have an increased risk on that. And then lastly, certain populations are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change on food safety, and people in developing regions, so low-income communities and those with weakened systems or immune systems are at a higher risk of experiencing foodborne illnesses. Ensuring food safety is changing in the changing climate requires addressing these vulnerabilities through equitable policies and practices. Again, so if you are in a weather that is too warm, or in those cases where it is too cold, your immune system gets affected. It can get depleted because of a harsh condition. And that's the reason why you see a lot of waves in terms of like viruses such as the flu. They can get, sometimes you are like, well, but it's a warm weather. Why am I getting the flu? It might be because your immune system is responding differently to what the virus is in the environment in itself. So again, your immune system gets affected. So this is all good, but what can we do to actually mitigate and adapt to the weather change, right? We can't just say, oh, well, the weather is changing. We just have to take it as it is. So what can we do in order to ensure that the safety of the food is preserved? So one of the things that we can do is to improve climate in agricultural practices. So climate resilient agriculture is crucial. So these include adapting practices like crop rotation, using drought resistant seeds, and improving irrigation efficiency. We have done a lot in terms of irrigation. Some people in the field use what we call the dripping method. That is not only to be more sustainable, but also to help control how we use the water and how we preserve the water in itself. So again, that's part of your sustainability techniques. And it helps farmers to adapt to changing weather patterns, but also minimize the risk of contamination and spoilage. The next thing that we can do is to adopt new food safety technologies. So we have a lot of technology that is merging. We have seen that with AI in the last year. We have talked a lot about AI. But for example, if you have a smart packaging that can monitor food freshness and a blockchain technology that can provide real-time tracking of your food throughout the supply chain, that might help in terms of climate change. And also these innovations can help detect and prevent food safety issues before they reach consumers. There is a lot of AI tools that are relying on data to provide you with predictability of food safety or possible food safety risk or concerns that might emerge through time. We also can have sustainability water management. Here in California, we have those initiatives already. As I mentioned, we have been in a perpetuated drought. In some areas, we have experienced it more than others. Unfortunately, in the area that I live, due to the situation of the weather in itself and the seasonality, we have experienced it more than perhaps in the areas in the northern part of California, where rain it's a lot more possible than it is for us here at the moment. So managing water resources, sustainability is another important adaptation strategy. And this includes using water efficiency irrigation systems. Here we have, for example, we have a schedule during the warm months. And then when it gets cold, where we expect quote unquote rain, we reduce the irrigation process for our lawns. And also as the weather gets colder, and again, we feel like it might rain, we have to shut off, like January and February, we cannot use water at all in terms for irrigation, okay? And so that helps with conservation efforts that the state has in order to ensure water. So by conserving water, we can ensure that crops and livestock receive safe, clean water, even in the face of climate-induced shortages. Strengthening the food safety standards is another way. And again, somebody mentioned ISO earlier, so we can expand a little bit more. And I can see likely that this is going to be introduced in the upcoming years, the GFSI level, to where that's not just going to be driven by ISO, and then you had FSSC 22000 in itself doing those changes because the change is driven by ISO, but also we're going to see that likely to be adopted into the GFSI world. So we need to address the growing challenges posed by climate change, and we need to strengthen the food safety standards for both the local and the global levels. And this means updating regulations to reflect new risks and ensuring the food safety protocols are adaptable to changing environment conditions as well. Then we also need to strengthen the early warning systems and monitoring. So when we have technology that look at early warning systems and monitors the weather patterns and how they might affect food safety, we can prevent foodborne outbreaks by predicting them, as I mentioned. So monitoring weather patterns, environmental conditions, and supply chains. These systems can provide real-time alerts that allow for quick action for anyone that is affected by it. So monitoring food safety at every stage of the supply chain is essential in a changing climate, and governments and businesses should work alike in order to ensure that we are attacking these issues together. As I mentioned, public health interventions. So having public health initiatives in every country also plays a critical role in maintaining food safety. Now, public health interventions are not just a government initiative. It should actually be also driven by organizations that work together to educate consumers, improve hygiene practices in food handling, and promote preventive measures to reduce the risk of foodborne illnesses in a changing climate. One of the things about the early warning system and working with government, when I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference recently, early in the week, there was actually a presentation of industry working with a government institution to create an early warning system for data collection for anything that is related to food safety. And this is all AI driven as well. So again, collaboration is important. Just like collaboration is important with or between industry and government, international collaboration it's even important or more important as well. We cannot live in silos anymore. We know that we're globalized. And because we are globalized, we need to start collaborating to solve these issues for climate change as we go in time. So again, countries need to work together to share knowledge and resources. Some people are being affected more rapidly about climate change than others. This includes strengthening food safety regulations, improving emergency response systems, and promoting sustainable practices worldwide as well. Reducing food waste is another way of actually having a mitigation strategy. Wasted food often ends up in landfills where it produces methane and potent greenhouse gases. By minimizing waste, we can reduce emissions and ensure that safe, nutritious food reaches to those that are in need. As well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to expand to these policymakers. These include creating policies that promote sustainable agriculture, invest in food safety technologies, and support public health initiatives. Then again, I mentioned earlier, educating your consumers. So the more education we provide in terms of how their household practices might affect as a ripple effect to the environment and therefore our supply for food. It's important so people get involved in conserving the environment and therefore preserving the food supply. And again, industry initiatives, I'm not going to expand to that. I think the private sector, it's investing quite a bit in technology nowadays. And I see they're being adaptable rapidly. We just have to be sure that it's not just the big corporations that have access. Again, nothing with that particular, but also the small facilities have access to technology as, again, this global process for climate change affects everyone. So in summary, and to wrap up, some key takeaways are climate change is having a profound impact on food safety, from increased pathogen growth to disrupting supply chains. We have discussed how rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and changing ecosystems are contributing to the risk in food production and distribution. However, by adopting mitigation and adaptation strategies, we can address these challenges and protect food safety for the future in itself. And so what is next? What can we do as an industry? And what can you do particularly as well? So whether you work in food production, policy making, or public health, we all have a role in ensuring food safety in the face of climate change. You can promote sustainable practices, invest in food safety technologies, support policies that address climate risk, and educate others on these important aspects of food safety. So now I'm just going to leave the floor for any Q&A that you guys might have, and I'm going to turn on my camera so you can see me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Question, yes, from from Christine. Are there any effects to manufacturing companies?
Yes, again, so it's all an ecosystem, right? So what comes in, you put out. So if there's any practice that you don't have that is sustainable, that will affect the environment in itself. So again, we need to adapt these technologies as much as we can. And it starts also with us in our household, right? So we recycle here in California as a second nature because it has been there for a while. And so again, implementing these practices is not just for the industry in itself, but also for your day-to-day life. It will affect the manufacturing and whatever you put out there. If it contaminates the water, then it will actually affect agriculture, and if it contaminates the soil, it will affect agriculture. And again, you have to remember this is just cycle.
Okay. Long question here from BG Ravikumar. Climate change and the effect on food during growth, harvest, storage, and transportation, but in the processing facility, all are addressed to control growth and contamination within the food facility. How does the food processing facility control the food spoilage during harvest and transportation?
Okay, so there are things that you're not going to have control over, nor it's going to have the farmer grower, right? So Mother Nature is going to give you what it can give you, right? So if an area is heavily affected by this climate change, then you need to take a look at this point at risk. Has my risk increased? And what kind of mitigation strategies we can put in collaboration with our suppliers in order to ensure that this risk does not affect the end consumer. So again, Mother Nature will provide you based on weather, what they're going to provide you. You don't have control over that. But if you see an increased risk, now your obligation is to analyze that and work in collaboration with your suppliers. If that is you're actually getting supplied directly from the field, that's to work with your growers in order to understand what is affecting the quality of what they're giving you and how you can mitigate that through different practices.
Okay. Question from Conrad. With increased risk when it comes to freshwater availability, do we expect new threats to emerge related to the recycling and reuse of water in food businesses? Are there any early signs of what these risks may be?
So if you're recycling and reusing the water, again, if you see my assumption is that you're testing that water regularly. And therefore, because you're testing the water regularly, you're going to see patterns in the water over time. And so if you're seeing a negative pattern, then now you need to address the reuse of this water. If you are using it, let's say that you reuse 3 cycles of water, and then you dump it, maybe you need to reassess. Maybe I just reuse it 2 cycles. Maybe I stop reusing the water. And so again, I know that a lot of these recycling and reusing of water is part of sustainability initiatives. So I'm not saying that you need to stop, but you need to reassess. Perhaps you need additional treatment in the water before you continue recycling. So all of those things need to be addressed through risk assessment. Are there early signs of what these risks might be? Again, you should be testing the water if you're recycling on a regular basis and reassessing your programs minimum at least once a year, in order to see if there's any patterns or risks that you need to mitigate through other implementing other techniques or any other programs.
Okay, thanks. Question from Arnab. Will there be any impact on the groundwater contamination like uranium due to abnormal rainfall patterns?
Yes. So again, you have to remember that your groundwater, it's what comes from the rain and starts into the field, and then it goes into your watershed or your springs, right? So if your soil has a likelihood to have more uranium, perhaps because there is acid rainfall or any other pattern that might increase that, or you might be close to an area where uranium can be a source of contamination, then there's likely that it's going to be absorbed even more through this process of global change and heavy rainfalls and floods as well. If you have a flood and you have wells nearby, they will get affected by these. So any other questions?
Yes, there are. Let me just broadcast this one. Question from Hendra. With climate change driving an increase in insect pests and subsequently higher pesticide use, do you think this could lead to crops breaching established maximum residue limits?
Well, yes, of course. The more you add pesticides, then the more, if we monitor that and we understand MRLs, then we need to understand that, again, we need to work with our growers if they're seeing a pattern on how they're applying these pesticides. Now, you have to remember that they have applicator licenses that allows them to apply a certain amount of pesticides to their crop. It's not like all of a sudden they see more pests and they're going to apply more. They might have to resort to other ways of controlling any increase in pests due to the weather pattern. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Question from Narija. Animals are also contributing to greenhouse gas emission, but they are also important for food security and safety. What will be a possible strategy to mitigate this problem?
I know cows have been a controversy And I don't want to get into the discussion. I have cows at the end of my slide for that same reason. Again, it's just working with your farms and looking at how there are ways where the methane can be mitigated. So I live close a big ranch. It's a big company. They do have a lot of cows. They're actually business is meat. And so the farm is very big, and methane can accumulate fairly easy there. I mean, when we cannot tell the cows not to, have waste. But again, it's how you spread perhaps the ranch, or which other technologies available in there to remove as much of that manure and debris and convert it into something that is more useful, and avoid as much as possible that methane issue to go into the atmosphere, which again, it's created the greenhouse. That's where it comes down to. Cows have been around forever. Or animals have been around forever. Farming of animals have been around forever. So I don't think the solution is just, to stop one way or another. It's just to find that middle ground to mitigate the problem, and perhaps remove the manure and convert it into fertilizer as soon as possible.
Maybe this makes sense to you, but I'm not quite sure. Arnab, how to prevent the loss of primary production in case of loss of primary production?
So how to prevent the loss of primary production in case of the loss of primary production? So I'm going to guess the question is, if you have a extreme weather pattern, how can you prevent the loss of primary production? And again, everything comes to risk assessment and prevention. So if I'm seeing that rainfall pattern has changed, like we have seen here in California, right? And water might be an issue for the next crop, or rains are coming in a way where it might affect the way that, again, in the nut industry, we depend a lot on the blooming. Then now we need to adapt our startup of the season to either become early or later. And we work at the Safe Food Alliance with our growers very closely, and we understand when these patterns get affected. And so they work really hard in order not to lose that primary production due to the weather patterns. So again, it's applying new technology that can predict these patterns and mitigating strategies based on that risk.
Question from Alok. How can food regulatory authorities help in mitigating issues of climate change?
Well, they need to have the hard conversations, right? They need to start looking or working with the industry to look at different areas in the globe that might be affected more than others with these patterns, and start establishing policies that are sustainable. In California in particular, we are very sustainable. We are known to be sustainable. Sometimes I look at regulations and I go like, how sustainable can we get? But, again, not going to the extremes. It's a matter of working with industry and making policies that are feasible to actually mitigate the climate change issues and how it affects the food supply.
Okay, thanks. Question from Luzviminda. At the moment, we are having issues with the presence of larvae in our broccoli and cauliflower raw materials from California. Is it still safe to process these infested produce?
Again, this might be a consequence of weather change, because as it gets warmer, these pests are going to reproduce more, and they're going to go through the different stages rapidly. We know that the presence of insects can lead to bacterial contamination. I'm not going to say it's unsafe, what comes down to is what kind of, so you're seeing the change, you're seeing the pattern, what kind of mitigation strategies you can put at your site and work with your growers in order to address these concerns. It's all about working together and see what is available in there in order to mitigate. Mother Nature is going to behave as as the nature is, right? And they're going to get adapted to the weather patterns. So if you give them the opportunity to reproduce, then you're gonna see that on your raw produce. So what can we do? That's the question I would pose to everyone. What can we do with our growers in order to mitigate these risks that we're seeing now as a pattern? And I don't have the right answer for you. You need to work with your supplier because they're the ones that are seeing in their first time what is affecting and why they're seeing more pest increase.
Okay. A few more questions. Oluwadunsin, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. How can food be preserved properly in case of rising temperature? What are the ways to prevent food spoilage?
Well, food spoilage, we have prevented it by treating the food typically with temperature. That's the easiest one. So if you're talking about preserving the food at home, I would recommend, boiling or, some people will do or learn techniques of preservation at home. If you're looking at the industrial side, then level, then we have several treatments that we can do to the food in order to ensure that these microorganisms, especially the food spoilage ones, not only the ones that are related to food safety, are controlled. So we typically use time and temperature, retort. HPP became very popular here in the US in the last decade or two because of the non-invasive way that it treats the food, take care of the pathogens and the spoilage organisms, and still have freshness in your food as well.
Okay, Habibat, kindly share specific risk of climate change for food packaging industries, part of the food chain, apart from the storage and transportation.
So in terms of climate change for food packaging industries, again, it comes to where you resource your materials. So if you're using, let's say, you're making paper cups and you're using trees to make these paper cups, if you have a climate change for your sources and the trees are not readily available for you when you need them, that might actually change your packaging structure. If you're using, again, it all depends on what you're resourcing, whether you're sustainable or not. If you're using any material that comes from Mother Nature to make your package, that's how climate change is going to affect you. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Raja, are RO systems for water enough?
So yeah, it all depends on how you design your RO water system. They are designed to actually eliminate chemicals because of the way that the membranes are made. And they are also, as a result, help with some of the bacterial loads that you will have in your water, making the water cleaner. Now, if you're seeing a higher increase or an increase in the risk for bacteriological and chemical, and you have built your RO system to hold certain amount of water and you see at the end still not clean, then you might have to redesign your RO water system. Perhaps add more loops to the treatment in itself. And I would leave that to your RO water system supplier to make that kind of recommendation. But I have worked with RO water systems I worked for it for 11 years, and it was very efficient to eliminate the risk that we wanted to eliminate at the time. We used the water as an ingredient.
Okay, we've reached the hour. Are you okay for a couple more minutes? Because we have.
I unfortunately need to leave, so I cannot stay for longer. And if you do have any other questions, my email is available. Again, we at Safe Food Alliance really appreciate the opportunity for allowing us to be here today. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer them the best I can.
Yeah, and Radhika's email's on the screen there, but we'll include it in the follow-up email that we send soon. So thanks for your time today. It's been great. Answered lots of questions as well, so I do appreciate it and hope to have you back very soon.
All righty. Yes, we'll connect and look for opportunities next year.
Yes, sure. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I've put your certificate in the sidebar, ladies and gents. Be following up with the recording shortly. Thanks for your time today, and watch out for the next email for next Friday's Food Safety Friday. So have a good weekend, everybody, and see you on the next one. Take care. Bye.